Funding for This Is Nashville comes from Burr and Foreman Law Firm, serving clients with transactional, litigation, and regulatory needs. Discovering how each client defines a win and working with them every step of the way to achieve it. Burr.com.
I'm Khalil Ekulona, and this is Nashville. After graduating from the University of California, Santa Barbara, Steve Swenson set out to make a name for himself in the radio industry. Mission accomplished. His 45-year career has seen him in key positions in Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, New York City, and finally here in Nashville. He is retiring shortly, and we're here at This Is Nashville. We would be remiss if we didn't sit down with our boss of the past 3 years to get one last drop of wisdom from him and to listen as he reflects on a fantastic career. So with that, I'd like to welcome Steve Swenson, President and CEO of Nashville Public Radio, to This Is Nashville. It's good to have you here.
Thanks, Khalil.
How's it going? How are you today?
I'm actually doing great today. As the countdown continues towards my final day, have not lost any of my enthusiasm for my final day. I've had a great 45 years, but I'm also ready for my next chapter. I call it refiring, not retiring.
Refiring?
Yes.
Oh, explain that to me.
I think that sometimes when you use the term retire, people think you're just going to sit at home and do nothing and kind of enjoy time off. But while I plan on doing plenty of that, I also plan on trying to stay active. My husband and I love traveling, so we'll do a lot of traveling. It fills our soul, and I have a lot to fill.
What are you looking forward to doing the most?
I think we have been very fortunate. I worked for many, many years in commercial radio, and I did well in commercial radio. And so I've had the resources to plan my retirement. And one of the things we're going to do is we own a home on Nantucket. We are going to continue to have our home on Nantucket and enjoy it during the good weather months. But we just put an offer in on a flat in Barcelona.
Okay.
And so we'll spend a lot of time in Barcelona and use that as a jumping off point to travel.
You're going to be going back and forth across the pond, as they say.
You got it.
All right, so you mentioned this. A lot of people are a little bit afraid of retiring because, they've got nothing to do. They feel like what do I do with my days? It doesn't sound like you're in that boat. It sounds like you have something that you things you still want to accomplish.
Yeah, and I also really am looking forward to getting off kind of the rapid treadmill that exists in the news business and in the radio business. I mean, for 45 years, when you're in the news business, you are constantly on call. Most of the all-news radio stations that I worked at in Los Angeles and New York and Washington, D.C. were 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I was a news director. I would get calls in the middle of the night from the editor's desk saying a cop was shot in New York City. What are we going to do? Who are we going to send? So your life is consumed 24 hours a day with the news and keeping track of the news and making sure you understand what's going on. And just not to have to report to an office, not have to be responsible for a large group of people. I am looking so forward to that.
Okay, so how did you balance that work-life balance? 45 years on this. As you said, a constant fire hose of either news and information to report or emergencies within your own staff to handle. How did you balance that to where you didn't lose yourself? And I know you were immersed in your work, but you didn't lose yourself in the work.
Yeah. I credit, to be honest with you, my upbringing and the life that I led, in my early years. I was in a town of about 60,000 people, which by today's standard is a pretty small community. I came from a family of 5 sisters and their husbands, so I had a lot of cousins, and every Sunday we would be at one of the aunts' houses for dinner, and all the cousins would be there. So I was always surrounded by a lot of people that I think kept me grounded. My dad owned a machine shop for about 20 years and very much middle-class upbringing, and he never made a heck of a lot of money, but he just enjoyed his life, and I got a lot of that. My dad's personality was one of pretty even keel. He's a sweetheart, or was a sweetheart. He passed away recently. And I think I got some of his genes, thank goodness.
Did your dad ever make you work in the machine shop as you were growing up?
I did. I worked every summer in high school, and I worked every summer when I went to college at the machine shop. It was not a big operation. I mean, I think at the height he might have had 15 employees. most of the time of the 20 years he owned it, he had 5 employees that were there. It was a machine shop that did small jobs. And so I was there, and he had a supervisor that, because I was the son of the boss, gave me all the really rotten jobs to do.
There you go. And humbles him, right?
Yeah, and I did a lot of sweeping of floors of all the chips, the stainless steel chips from all the drill presses.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Growing up in Southern California, did you always want to work in radio?
Actually, no. I mean, I remember growing up and watching the 6 o'clock news on the local CBS affiliate. There was a guy named Jerry Dunphy. And I actually thought Jerry was the president of the United States when I was growing up. But I was always fascinated by news. But I never really thought about going into news. When I was in my undergraduate work at University of California, Santa Barbara, I kind of just happened to come across a communication studies program. And the teacher was amazing. He was a radio guy. And he kind of got my juices flowing on that. So I went to graduate school. My first year of graduate school was the University of Oregon in telecommunications. He had me come back to be his teaching assistant at UC Santa Barbara for my second year of graduate school. And it was during that I met a woman whose cousin was the news director of KFWB in Los Angeles, which was an all-news radio station there. And so my master's thesis was on all-news radio and how they made decisions on their story selection and what kind of influenced that. And it was during that I got really excited, so much so that those first holidays, I began working for them as a desk assistant, as you pointed out. I always thought that was a strange name, but I was a desk assistant, basically a gopher for the editor and doing whatever they needed to get done. During those days, there were still teletype machines, the UPI and AP teletype machines that were clacking in a little room. And one of my jobs was to go in and rip the copy off of those, separate it for the news anchors and the news writers, and it was fun. I loved it.
What was it like covering news in that era? Like, what were you learning from the anchors and the bosses you were around?
Well, it's interesting because I had never taken a journalism class in all my schooling. And so I learned on the job. I was very lucky as a desk assistant that the editor I worked 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. Monday through Friday. And brutal. And the editor I worked with kind of took me under his wings, and I would write copy, give it to him, and 3 weeks later it'd come back with red marks all over it. So I learned kind of the business through him. And then I quickly was able to become what we called a newsroom coordinator. And I worked with the reporters and all their equipment and their cars, because they all had cars. They'd out be covering news stories. I'd get to go out with them. And it was during that time I really got to learn. Now, the type of news that I was always involved with at the commercial all-news radio stations, very, very different than what we do here at Nashville Public Radio or what NPR does. We were I like to call it hit-and-run journalists. I mean, they would go out, cover a news conference, file 3 pieces, and then go to the next news story. And it might be a car accident. It may be recovering from weather. But it was very much just saying, here's what's going on right now. Weather storms coming in and covering that sort of thing. So it was much more a breaking news sort of thing and very little in-depth, deep dive journalism.
But that's still a grind to be on it like that.
Yeah.
You rose up in the ranks pretty quickly.
I did.
Can you give us an example or a story about a time where you were either on the pulse of something new or you realized, I got a lot more to learn?
I would say the first election that I was involved with, at the time I was the newsroom coordinator, and we did long-form live a local election coverage tied in with the national. And so he put me as the main producer for it. So I sat in the studio with a guy named Charlie Brailer. He was our political reporter and anchor. And we just went hour upon hour on covering the news, our reporters out in the field. And it was during that I really got excited about this idea of live radio and live coverage of radio. And I also got a very good sense from him on what are the types of things we should be talking about, reporting on. So when I had the opportunity to become a news director, I was transferred to New York at 1010 Winds, an all-news radio station owned by CBS at the time. And it was during that time that I learned a lot about what's important in New York, what's important to our listeners, and understanding that and that really influenced the way we covered things.
What was that transition like from Southern California to New York? Different places.
Night and day. I mean, I was 30 years old. I never, ever in my life thought I would leave California. The company wanted me to go to New York. I will tell you, my mother was not happy about me moving to New York. I promised her it would only be 2 years. Well, now, however many years later, I still haven't gone back to Southern California. But it was amazing. I was young, 30 years old, news director, walking into a situation that was an all-news radio station that started in 1965. So most of their on-air staff were all older than me. Most of the editor staff were all older than me. And I realized, and they were all New Yorkers, and I was this young punk from Southern California. Los Angeles, even worse. And so I realized right away that I was going to have to do a lot of listening. I was going to have to learn from them. And we had a really crotchety morning editor who used to, in those days, we had cartridge machines that we put the story's reporters on. And I would walk in the morning, and sometimes he'd be so upset he'd throw a cart across the newsroom. And he was just your quintessential hardcore New York City guy. And I knew I had to prove myself to him. And most of that was just me listening to him, asking him his advice all the time on what stories we should cover. I mean, one thing I learned quickly, and he said it to me, is when you assign a reporter to go to a story, you have to understand how in New York City, how long it will take them to drive there, because they might be able to get 5 miles downtown much quicker than a mile and a half across town, just because of the traffic in New York City. So, you know, I think being open and listening and knowing that I had a lot to learn was the most important thing.
You gave us a hint on some of the technologies you all used at the time. I mean, now we have a plethora of technologies at our fingertips to use to be able to broadcast news to people. Give us a sense of what you all had to do back in the day to get a story out on air.
We had cassette players, and our reporters had what we called alligator clips. So it was an audio cord with 2 clips at the end of it. At the time, there were still on almost every corner in New York City a public telephone booth. And so they would go out and cover a story. They'd go into the telephone booth. They would unscrew the mouthpiece of the telephone, use their alligator clips to clip their tape recorder into it, speak into the phone to us as we recorded it, and then hit play on their recorder. When they were done, they'd pause it and continue talking. So we really there was no such thing as a cell phone back in 1985, at least that we had. By 1987, we had kind of the Get Smart big phones that, you know, that people would carry around. But yeah, technology was really challenging back in those days. But our reporters were amazing in getting to the story, finding a phone, and getting on the air.
When you tell these war stories to younger reporters about the lengths that you all had to go through, what type of reaction do you get in return from them?
Well, I think, you know, when I talk to them about how we used to have to edit tape, you know, now we do everything on a computer.
Yeah.
Back then, we had reel-to-reel machines. We would sit down, we had a razor blade, we had a yellow pencil, and we would move the 2 reels back and forth to find the place that we wanted to start the actuality that we were going to use on air. We'd cut it with a razor blade, we'd put tape on it, put it together. So it was very intensive and manual. So yeah, today, I couldn't go into our edit booth here at WPLN and sit down and on the computer edit tape.
Yeah.
And I know all of our people can do it in a snap. I couldn't do it, but I also know they couldn't go edit tape on a reel-to-reel machine.
They'll know if they have the patience for that. I mean,
Exactly.
I imagine you're like, it's a pretty nerve-wracking because you can't make a mistake. You only have but so much tape to work with.
Correct. No, if you misedit a piece of tape, you're pretty much in trouble. Yeah.
Oh, wow. If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekulona. My guest is Steve Swenson, who is currently the president and CEO of Nashville Public Radio. I say currently because he is soon refiring after a 45-year career in the radio industry. Okay, so after New York, you go to WTOP in Washington to work in station management.
Yes.
How did your experience being in news, being in the trenches with people for so long, how did that help you when it came to running a station?
I think that I like everything in life, sometimes there is kind of the right moment that next stage happens for you. And that was the right moment for me. I mean, to be honest with you, I'd been at CBS. I had hoped I would be promoted into a general manager job with CBS. I actually had lunch one day with the president of CBS, and he said, "Listen, Steve, you're someday going to be a general manager, but you got to go do it elsewhere first." Now, that's hard to hear from your boss, especially having been with the company for 16 years. So I took him to heart. I began looking for a job. There was a company, a small radio company that owned WTOP in Washington, D.C., but that was the only all-news radio station they owned. So they really had no sense of running them, and it wasn't doing well. So I met the president of the company. He asked me to listen to the station and give him feedback. So I spent a week listening to the station, gave him a long report of my thoughts about it, and he hired me. And what was great is that there was so much that station needed just in terms of basic blocking and tackling that it quickly turned itself around and quickly started doing well. And for me, I never thought I wanted to get into running a business. That was not my goal ever. I was really enjoying the journalism side. I thought I'd always be behind the scenes. But as I began moving up within the newsroom and then ran a newsroom, and started seeing other people running businesses in our industry, I realized, well, you know what? That's something I could do. And that first step for me, my first general manager job in Washington, D.C., went really well. So much so in 3 years, my former boss called me and said, come back to New York and run our all news stations there.
Okay, so before we talk about your return to New York, something came to me. Okay, so you said covering stories in New York, vastly different from L.A. L.A. was hit and run. New York, what's important to New Yorkers, what is happening there? You go to D.C., that is the capital of national and global politics.
Yes, very different. Absolutely
That's
very
a beast,
different.
huh?
Yeah. I mean, I remember at the time, the public radio station in Washington, D.C. was the most listened to radio station in Washington, D.C. Overall music stations over WTOP, which is the one I was running, because it's such a political town. It's the seat of our government, and there are so many folks from outside our country that live there and work there. I would hop in taxi cabs in New York, and they were all listening to the radio station I ran, 1010 Wins. I'd hop into taxi cabs in Washington, D.C. They were listening to the public radio station. And the reason they were is that they felt that station did more in-depth, deep coverage, and that's what they felt they needed. So it was a very, very different thing. And so, taking the sensibilities of what I had learned in New York and taking them and thinking they would work in Washington, D.C., they weren't going to work. There were some elements of what we did in New York that would work in terms of breaking news and making sure we were on it quickly, but also the types of stories we did there were different.
During your stay there, did you become a fan of public radio since it's this immensely popular show? And did you listen to Diane Rehm?
I'm going to admit something that I would never have admitted, but now that I'm leaving, I'll admit.
Okay.
I never listened to a public radio station in my life until I moved on from commercial radio. Commercial radio to me was my life. It was something I felt I had to do. There was a period of time when I was a news director and then running the news station where I didn't even listen to music radio because I was so focused on being prepared on the news, so focused on making sure I wasn't going to miss anything as the leader of this news operation that I didn't listen to music. I didn't listen to public radio because I don't care what they're doing. This is what we do, and we got to do it as the best we can. And it wasn't until kind of my latter years in Washington, D.C., that I got to know the general manager of the public radio station there. And he and I became close friends, and that turned into him trying to recruit me to come to public radio at one point.
Eventually you did.
I did.
So you go back to New York, CBS, big time stuff. I mean, big time radio. You're running two stations.
Yeah.
What's that juggling act like?
That was hard because when I was the news director of 1010 Wins, WCBS was our competitor, and we wanted to beat them. We wanted to beat them on every story. We wanted to be on the air first. That was a huge competitive environment. The news director of their station and I got along well, but we both wanted to kill each other. We both wanted to always win. So when all of a sudden I was brought back and now I was the general manager of both those radio stations, I knew that competitive environment that was there. And I realized I was going to really have to be careful that one didn't feel I was favoring the other, and that I had to make sure that WCBS, which had been my competitor and now I was running it, felt that I was embracing them. So I spent a lot of time in the newsroom. I spent a lot of time listening to them. And I wanted to make sure they had some wins as we went along. And then I worked really hard at trying to get both stations to see how they complemented each other. We 1010 Wins was a very much a New York City-centric radio station, whereas WCBS, the large part of their audience was Long Island and Southern Connecticut. So we focused on that to make sure that we were really doing well on that. So they began complementing each other really well.
Second stint in D.C., you manage 6 stations. First, let me ask you this. When did you sleep?
It was something I wasn't sure I wanted to do, I'll be honest with you. I was enjoying New York. I was enjoying running the 2 all-news stations. I felt I was a news guy. And then the president of our company came to me and said, hey, I need you to go to D.C. I need you to run our 6 stations. And he and I had long discussions about it. To be honest with you, I thought if I didn't do it, I would not be in good stead with the company anymore.
Okay.
So there was a little bit of that pushing me to go do it. But it was one of the best things I ever did. I mean, going there and now running a top 40 music station, an all sports talk station, an all Spanish language music station, an urban rhythmic radio station, a classic radio station. Those stations were great brands in Washington, D.C., well known. And I learned so much from the program directors of those music stations. And I learned how much was very similar to between being a programmer of an all-news radio station like we used to run and being a programmer of a music radio station.
Where are they similar?
They're very similar in what you need to do in terms of repeating the hits. In the all-news radio stations, you have to repeat the top stories. The classic was the one I went to run as a news director. 1010 Wins is all news all the time. But the most important line is, you give us 22 minutes, we'll give you the world. Well, that commitment to the listener is that they don't have to listen long to hear everything that's going on. So that means you got to repeat stories a certain amount of time. In fact, there's a lot of people who felt like, oh my God, you repeat everything. But, our goal was not to keep people to listen for hours at a time, but to have people come back to us often. And that's the way top 40 music stations are. You got to play the hits or they're not going to like you. So that was the biggest similarity that I found.
So soon on to Nashville. Why was this job so appealing for you? You worked in corporate for decades. You switched to public radio, entirely different beasts. What was the appeal of public radio and Nashville public radio that brought you here?
Commercial radio began going through, to be honest with you, what public radio is now going through many years ago. Back in 1996, when Congress passed a law that took away most of the restrictions on how many radio stations a company could own. When I got in the business, my company was Westinghouse Broadcasting. It could only own, across the entire country, 7 AM radio stations and 7 FM radio stations. That was it. Then along the way, it began to go to, I think it was 14 and 14. But in 1996, Bill Clinton was the president, signed into law that deregulated radio. So all of a sudden, you had these companies buying up as many radio stations as they could get. iHeart, over 500 radio stations. CBS, over 200 and some radio stations. That consolidation really changed the business. Radio was locally owned. What we are here at Nashville Public Radio.
Yeah.
We're a locally owned business. At the time I got in the business, radio was locally owned. And it became instead these large companies that own massive amounts of stations. And all of those companies were publicly traded companies. And so the driver became, and I'm not putting this down because I lived it and I understood it, was the stock price of CBS. Mm-hmm. You need to make decisions based on growth. You need to make decisions based on profit, the size of your profit, the margins. And so it really began to change the way those stations were run. And then when things began to get tough, cuts. Mm. And I would say the tail end of my career at CBS, I would almost every quarter get a call from headquarters. We're not making our numbers in Chicago and LA, so all the markets have to cut. And so we would have to cut. So I got in this world of a lot of layoffs. Laying off people. They called it restructuring, a nice name for we have to reduce our costs. And it typically, the most expensive part of a radio station is people. Yeah. And so that's what was happening. So I went to public radio because I was very worried about the state of journalism. I was very worried that all of these corporately owned entities were just cutting. And what were they cutting? Journalists. Mm. And there was less and less good quality journalism going on. I mean, look at the Tennessean. The Tennessean was a nationally recognized, incredible newspaper for a long, long time. Owned by Gannett. Gannett is going through a lot of problems, and Gannett downsize. And so I think that was what drove me to want to go to public radio, because public radio to me, our number one goal is public service. Yeah. Our number one goal is serving our audiences because we're all local businesses. And yes, we have to break even. I get that. But I don't have to go to corporate and do a 20% growth in revenue. Yeah. I don't have to go to corporate and do a 25% growth in my bottom line. And that is just a whole different way of looking at it. And I felt going to public radio, that was the one area in our country that was still caring about quality journalism and the importance that represents for our democracy.
All right, I have one more. We got to go to break, but I have one quick question for you. What's the thing you're most proud of influencing here in Nashville? And more importantly, what are you most proud of influencing here in Nashville Public Radio?
I think my proudest thing is that we as a news organization over the 6 years I've been here have doubled our size. We are larger, have more employees. Our newsroom has gone from 9 full-time employees to 27 full-time employees, all during a period of time when every other news organization in Nashville has shrunk, has gone down. And I think that we are trying to step into a void of providing good quality journalism. We've grown our beat system. We have more reporters now. The show that you and I are talking on didn't exist 3 years ago. There was no community dialogue going on that was civil, and not people screaming at each other or not trying to be as polemic as they can be. And to me, those things really are important for community, important for connection, but really important for citizens.
Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Nashville Public Radio President and CEO Steve Swenson about how he views the state of journalism today. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org. Funding for This Is Nashville comes from Nobody Trashes Tennessee, the state of Tennessee's official litter prevention campaign, managed by TDOT. Details on how to be part of the solution to end littering at nobodytrashestennessee.com.
I'm Khalil Ekulona, and this is Nashville. My guest is Nashville Public Radio, soon to be retired or refired.
Thank you.
President and CEO Steve Swenson. Before the break, we learned about his rise in news radio broadcasting. Now we're going to get his views on the state of journalism as it stands today. Steve, again, thanks for being here. Where is journalism these days in your mind?
The most broken I've seen it in my 45 years, unfortunately. I think that if I look back in the 1980s when CNN started, cable news has really begun the process of changing what journalism looks like in this country. The addition of Fox News going up against CNN, then MSNBC. We began to move towards your flavor of news as opposed to what's the truth, what should people know, how do we provide a wide variety of viewpoints, a wide option of what people should know about instead of being in your own silo. So that's really frustrated me. Then as commercial journalism, the model that supported commercial journalism, which was advertising, is totally broken. That all began with the advent of the internet. Most newspapers were really supported by the classifieds. When classifieds went away because of Craigslist, the financial support for newspapers, just the bottom fell out. And that began kind of the long decline for journalism. I worry about wide swaths of our country that have no local news organizations, no local newspaper. I mean, we're lucky here in Nashville that we still have some pretty decent, vibrant news organizations, but there are many, many, many towns across the country that have nothing. So that worries me a lot because I think, our country as a democracy was set up by our forefathers to have checks and balances in the government. Well, that's gone now. But it was also, they were relying on a free press to hold our government accountable. And that really has taken a hit.
The dearth and lack of local news has led people to try to get their stories from other sources of information.
Yeah.
Some cite a mistrust of the media and journalism. Do you think those folks have a point?
I do. I think the noise there. When 2 years after I got here, we had a T-shirt that emblazoned. It said, "Opinions are cheap, facts are expensive," and I think the sentiment behind that was when you are a cable news network and you sit in your studio and you have 7 people around the anchor and they're just pontificating and giving their opinions. That's not news coverage. That's not the journalism that I grew up with. It's people sitting there talking. And so what has happened is there's very few organizations now. There's the New York Times, there's the Washington Post, even though it's going through a lot, that still do intensive journalism. And then there is NPR, and there are the local public radio stations that still do deep dive journalism. It takes time, it takes money, it takes resources to do that. And I think that a lot of people, because of the noise at the national level and the lack of local news and local coverage, have tended to move towards just almost believing whatever they see on their iPhone. And that is really, really hard. And then I think us as journalists have contributed to that lack of trust. When you are having a lot of people sitting around a table giving their opinions, that leads to it. When you have networks that have a flavor of news, that leads to distrust. And it's distressing to see that, for me, in my lifetime, Congress always had a very low approval rating. Well, you know what? Journalism is now below Congress, and that's really scary.
Okay, so what can journalism as an industry do to change that around?
I think it has to be grassroots and needs to be at the local level. I often say that our reporters live in the community they report on. Their kids go to the same school as our listeners' kids go to. They go to the same churches. They are governed by the same government. That they are an important part of the community. I'll never forget, I went with one of our reporters to a local event. We both spoke, and afterwards, one of the people who was there came up to one of our reporters and said, "Oh, wow, I loved your mom. Your mom was my school teacher for my, I don't know, 5th grade or whatever it was." That creates trust. That creates bond. That creates respect. And so I think the way we get around it is rebuilding local journalism. And I don't think until we rebuild that local journalism, we're going to be able to change the national discussion that goes on.
You know, a lot of young people have been turning to podcasts. They've been turning to shows like The Daily Show, for a couple decades now, to get their news and information. It's providing facts. It's providing some opinion, but it's doing it in an entertaining manner. Now, I know some old school journalists have turned their noses up to this. Do you think journalism as a whole could do a little bit more to meet people where they are to get them back into the fold?
Yeah, I think that our model, if I'm thinking of my whole life in radio, our model was that people had to come to us at 90.3. That was our model. You heard something was going on? Okay, let me find a radio and let me punch the thing. You know what? People don't do that anymore. Our model has to find people where they are. We have to get our information to them where they are. And it does have to be compelling. It does have to be interesting. It does have to be digestible. And it can't just be, here are the facts and that's it. Because people are used to hearing stories. And I'm a big believer that all of us in radio, whether you are on the development side, whether you're doing what you do, are reporters, whoever it is we're storytellers. And to get people to believe, to get people to support you, to get people to give you money, you know, they have to feel like it's important and critical to their lives. Well, you got to connect with them. And the way you connect with them is through great storytelling, compelling storytelling.
Now, in 2020, journalism took another view of itself after George Floyd, the pandemic, and a lot of things. And the idea of being objective, as journalism had been, I think, since its inception, was under question, because sometimes it felt like in order to get the story out, to get the facts out, journalists themselves inhibited from expressing their humanity as to not show bias. I understand the principle around it, but something happens when you don't share that you're human and you're affected by this. All of us. I mean, even here on this show and in this station, sometimes there's been very difficult shows and very difficult stories that have us pause and sit outside in the parking lot and to take care of ourselves. Some tears have been shed. Do you think it's wise for journalists as a whole, particularly if any young journalism students are listening to this now, to add, when appropriate, their own humanity to the stories they're covering?
Always add your humanity. That's our connection with the audience, is people listen to Khalil because they like Khalil. They don't listen to Khalil because I listen to WPLN. They don't do that. They connect with you. One of the things I loved about radio, so much more than television, and the reason I never went to television, is I felt television was about show business in the video. Get the right video. And I thought getting the right video really biased what the story turned out to be, because you had to get the right video. Radio is this connection of your voice, me in my car, listening to you. And you know what? I connect with you because you're Khalil, a human being. So yes, I believe in humanity. Do I also believe that it is our job as journalists is to be as objective as possible and to be as honest as possible in giving information so that people can make their decisions? It's not my job to direct them to make the decision that I believe in. Is instead to give them the information so they can make their decision. But yes, I believe in humanity. And I believed in humanity of our reporters, whether I was in commercial radio or here, for years. You got to feel like you are connecting with the audience, and they got to feel like they're connecting with you.
Let's take one more break. When we return, we'll talk with Steve Swenson about the recent attacks on public media from the federal government and learn why you as listeners and consumers of public radio should be paying very, very close attention. Stay with us. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Ekulona, and this is Nashville. My guest is Steve Swenson, the soon-to-be refired Steve Swenson. He is currently serving as the president and CEO of Nashville Public Radio. Steve, again, thanks for being here. Okay, so the federal government recently held hearings about public media. The leaders of NPR and PBS were grilled and asked questions about their operations. It's kind of a move that causes concern in some, chills in others. Why are you paying attention to this new focus on public media in our country?
We're in a very precarious time. I mean, I believe, as we've been talking about through this show, I believe that commercial journalism and public journalism have been, under fire and declining, to be honest with you, for quite some time. And I think that the function of journalism is critical to our form of government, a democracy. And so when I was watching those hearings, it was pretty depressing to me as a journalist, as someone who believes that our number one job is serving our local public. And to see the way things in my mind were twisted was very, very frustrating. I think there's a misperception that public radio is NPR. Mm-hmm. And NPR is a news organization headquartered in Washington, D.C. We, WPLN, pay for their news coverage. But there is no other relationship between us.
Yeah.
We are a locally owned, community-owned radio station supported by our community. Our money to run this operation costs us about $8 million to run this operation. 94% of that $8 million is provided by our local community. Only 6% comes from taxpayer money through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. For us, that's $400,000. So out of that $400,000, $7.6 million is raised here locally by people who support us and like us and believe in us and think we're important.
Mm-hmm. We've actually been around longer than NPR, right?
We have been around. The NPR started in the 1970s. Our radio station started, don't hold me to this, but I think it was 1962 or 1963.
Yeah.
WPLN, the call letters are Public Library Nashville. Mm-hmm. We were owned by the public library. And, most public radio stations have two types of ownership. Us, is a community licensee. We have a board of directors who are volunteers. They all have other jobs, and they volunteer to be on our board and help us run our radio station, and we're supported by the public. There are some public radio stations that are owned by an educational institution, whether it's a university or a public school system. But that's basically the two type, and they're all locally owned. None of them are NPR owned or run by NPR.
Mm-hmm. You said you saw the writing on the wall in '96 when the deregulation happened and all these big time megaliths started consolidating and collecting individual news stations. Did you ever think we'd be in this position as an industry, a station, or really in our country?
I never did. No. I mean, I am pretty surprised about where our country is. I'm pretty surprised at how, there are really just two divergent views of our country. I like to say it's hard to have truth if you can't even all agree on certain truths. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of things that I feel people are not agreeing on now. And it's really hard to have quote unquote facts if people don't agree that a particular thing is a fact. Mm-hmm. And so that's what worries me a great deal about where we are as a country. And I never thought we would be at this place.
How have you personally approached conversations with someone who believes that water isn't wet?
It's really, really hard.
Yeah.
If they're friends, if they're colleagues, usually we can get through it because we know each other. We care about each other. We have lives outside of that viewpoint that we share. So you usually can get through. It can be frustrating. Mm-hmm. It can be aggravating. you can sometimes go, why am I not getting through? And I'm sure they're thinking, why is he not getting what I'm saying? And that's really, really difficult. But it's more, I think, folks who don't know each other or don't engage with each other, that it's become so strident and so, I don't even want to meet that person because I hear they're a Trump supporter, or I don't even want to meet that person because they liked Biden. That's really a bad place to be in.
I'm curious about when you're out, you're meeting people, because you meet people all the time.
Yep.
What they tell you about public radio and what it means to them. And I say this because we had a recent call-in episode where we had a caller call in and he said, I just wanted to leave a message to my brother, my brother and sister-in-law, and tell them I listen to both sides of things.
I love it. I think, one of the challenges that exists in our affiliation with NPR is that a lot of people do believe that NPR is on the progressive side of the world, that maybe is more in favor of the liberal way to look at things versus the Republican side of looking at things. And that creates a challenge for us as a local news station. But one of the great stories I was at a cocktail party one night, and I won't say who this person is, but he was a pretty big muckety-muck in Nashville, ran a very large organization in Nashville, and was very much a dyed-in-the-wool Republican. And, I spoke a little bit and we're all talking. And then at one point he walks up to me and he says, I got to say something. He whispers in my ear. He says, I want you to know I am not a fan of NPR, but you need to know I think WPLN's reporters are the best. I think you give everyone a fair shake. I think you're honest and straightforward, and your reporting is really quality. And that made me feel fabulous.
I imagine. So what are some innovative and new approaches you'd like to see public radio adopt as we move into this uncertain future?
Public radio, in my estimation, having come from commercial radio, is way behind on the digital side of things. Part of that is that digital requires a lot of impressions to turn around and get resources to support your work in doing it. Advertisers or sponsors or corporate sponsors, they want to reach a lot of people. And so that requires a lot of impressions digitally to be able to do that. We, as a small standalone public radio station, have a really hard time competing in that area. So I think our number one chore moving forward is not to just be seen as a radio station, but as a news organization that is out in whichever platform you prefer to get your information. And that's going to take resources. That's going to take time. That may take some restructuring of what we do internally in order to be able to achieve that goal. But I think that's really critical.
Any parting words for us? Give us some wisdom to take with us as we move along.
There's a lot of people that I think are down about, the prospects of public radio. And I'm not down about the prospects of public radio. I think, the quality journalism there's still a need for it and people care about it. You asked, what do our people say to me when we're out there? People who are giving us money love us. And there's a lot of people that are giving us money to support what we do because they believe in what we do. And as I mentioned to you before, of the 8 million, 7.6 million is coming from people who support us, who care about us, who like us. And so I think that connection, that support is still really key to the health of public radio. And even if, I hate to say it because I don't want to put it out in the ether, but even if Congress defunds public radio, PLN is going to be here. It's not going away. We'll have to tighten our belts. We may not be able to do all the public service stuff we think we should do for our community, but we're still going to be here. But we do need people to realize this is a big threat. And this is something that is dangerous for the service we provide to them day in and day out. So I encourage people, we say it all the time, go to WPLN.org, go up in that upper right-hand corner, click on that donate button. If you've been giving us $20 a month, think about how you can up that, because it is still really important.
Steve Swenson is nearing the end of a 45-year career in the news business. He's the current president and CEO of Nashville Public Radio and a pretty damn cool boss. Steve, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate the conversation.
Thanks, Khalil. I was worried about it, but I had fun.
It was great. It was great. And thanks to you for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced by the entire This Is Nashville team. It was directed by Tasha A.F. Lemley. Our board operators, Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind our theme music are LaRange and Namir Blade. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get good podcasts. And the conversation doesn't end here. Comment and tell us what you want to hear on the show by leaving us a message, 615-751-2500. You can find us on Blue Sky and Instagram and X at This Is Nashville. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Ekulona. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody, and to be good to each other.